For you people, many people that tell me that they see the show and then they ask me to tell them exactly what it is that I'm talking about. Let me open with a volley for you. I would think it a safe bet that those who watch this show with any regularity would consider themselves a bit above average intellectually, and very likely are. So ask yourself, what is it that makes people want to ask for a name or description about what something is? Why not look at it and decide what it is? And if it helps any of you out there, along the lines of what I'm saying, let me point out, I did not even name this show. And I did not even reserve approval right. I just told them to make up a name and stick it on there. And that's what it's been. So I didn't even do that. So ask yourself why there has to be a name for it. I know, but ask yourself. Don't answer yourself. Especially if you're sitting there at home alone. You want to get away from that as all possible. And now the news. Almost as soon as humans leave the straightforward, unambiguous garden of childhood, they want a system to live by. This indeed being an expected sign of their social maturing, but not of their intellectual growth. There was once a race of thinking creatures who drew up maps of their homeland, two types in fact. One series of maps covered their external conditions and the other their internal. And few ever purchased the latter inasmuch as they never actually produced one. Near one ongoing project was posted this sign: just because a man doesn't have the blueprints of a structure doesn't mean that he can't imagine he does. None progress who do not go past all concepts of progress. Before the later stages of man's mythologies, dragons were not his adversary, but a helpmate upon whom he would fly into battle. The silent, dense woods are only a threat in tales intended for youth. Without a compass to the cosmic clock, you can never be certain if you're looking forward or back. And lacking a knowledge of man's chronology, it's hard to tell who you can trust. Yesterday's friends are tomorrow's foes, and in turn reemerge as new allies. Even though men sing the praises of patience, it's understood no better than is alertness, if by understand we mean operational. The parade goes by, the parade returns, and all of the time, us in its midst. One man did everything in twos. He was born, then he died. He was illiterate, then educated. He was poor, then better off. He was flabby, then became strong. And just all in all, it all worked so well that he never wanted to tamper with it. One man stayed cooped up too much. And another man's approach to where he stayed was anywhere but here. It is not unknown for mystical dilettantes to try and bring automatic physical functions, such as their breathing and heartbeat, under willful control, and in so attempting, screw up these operations. But note, nothing similar ever occurs regarding mental activity. Where is the folly of an eagle on a bus if it is on a bus that it wants to be? Under the reign of the do-right rule, no ordinary man can do that which is not. Those who find the ideas of others to be an important part of their own intellectual life reveal what a lack of one they actually have. The nice thing, said one man, about still living at home into your adult years is that you really know your way around in there. A positive view of the matter, not shared, might I add, by all. Any words remembered from one supposedly more conscious, which numbered 10,000, were originally 600. Out on a barren plain, man constructed a city, a place marvelous and complex. In fact, more complex than was necessary. One day life said to a certain man, "Why at times do you seem annoyed with me?" And the mortal replied, "You're responsible for man being as he is, so you know the answer to this. There are no single causes, only multiple ones." A mental health note by way of our literary desk. Sanity, repetition, be thy name. One lad refought mankind's most significant battles, using as combatants toy soldiers, and using as toy soldiers his thoughts. When he was alone in his room, his parents were afraid to enter. Just as it should be, but how it cannot be, till one has given birth to oneself. Throughout the universe are trails of blood, unseen, but marking some striking past travels. All measurements made by the mind are insufficient in scope. This is not due to a flaw in the mind, but is a normal result of its natural operation. The too sufficient principle under which man lives does not actually limit, but merely establishes the maximally required. A space exists that most overlook, in which things can run less restrained. Any freedom spelled with letters already known will be just a new form of captivity. Thus a man who knows correctly how to think, "Let me out of here," knows not to actually say it, lest the reverb of the sound reinforce the existing walls. The mind will assist man in his pursuit of anything he can imagine, save one thing, the only thing of which it is structurally incapable. Do get past the initial apparently irrationality of it and see that, having some external system and standard to faithfully live by, serves the ordinary as a substitute for freedom. Who wants to step off a train out in the middle of nowhere? One reason that ordinary men need legends, religion, fairy tales, and mythology is because if they actually knew where they came from and where they're headed, it'd scare the starch out of them. One warrior, after finally getting to the front lines in the heart of the battle and meeting his enemy face to face, later snorted to himself over how much he resembled repetition and habit. It is the opponent unknown who seems exotic and fascinating. One father so advised the son, "As long as you treat acting seriously as a game, a necessary game, you're okay." Self-stimulation of the mind is for some the only satisfying intellectual act. The solo pursuit that is creative. One man notes, "I thought I was making progress when what I said could embarrass me more than what I did. But now, I don't know." One man located melancholy and loneliness, not in events or in behavior, but someplace else. "What a find," thought he, "and how much fuel have I wasted in my scanning of the skies." Numerous are those who will undertake a physical act of seclusion, but few are those who understand the shallower reality behind it. And with all the cards now face up before you, the dealer again reminds you that the stakes can always be raised by the inclusion of the unexpected. "What a find," reflected one man, "and how many hands have I squandered through my bets on the predictable." For those seeking consciousness, the problem with a sure thing is just that. Time, as perceived existing outside of man, is a useless concept. One advantage the body has over the intellect is that it can repeat the same exercise over and over and continue to get results. There was once a man who carried around a box that was filled with great activity. Sometimes he wasn't sure what to call the box, and sometimes he wasn't sure where he got it. But at all times, there was no doubt that it was now his. Some seekers, upon failure, are sealed up inside the castle. Some seekers realize that they begin their quest from such a position. Magnostic fisticuffs. The perennial challenger to the champions in the King's weight division is a firm believer in the old 1-2 punch, particularly when facing a shared crowned opponent. The title to which the mind can always lay claim for itself, that to which anything, 3 or more blows, is totally a waste of good time. A life of crime is pursued by some as an antidote to boredom. There are few who are able to do this non-physically. A man more conscious may be the only person on this planet without an enemy, at least from his viewpoint. One man sought out a mystic and offered to pay him twice his normal fee if he'd tell the man something truly transcendental, but in a simple form that he could readily understand. And now some news from our aeronautics and space desk. There are beings on other worlds laughing at man. And now on to the slop reports, if indeed they're now needed. Life on the sea. If you're a mere deckhand, what you don't know won't either hurt or help you. The ship you're on will come in on time regardless. After the curious bout of choking had subsided, they discovered, tattooed on the man's upper palate, these words: without alertness, what is consciousness? But before anyone in attendance could undertake an analysis of the message, the man suddenly revived, displaying symptoms that he was about to swallow somebody else's tongue. There are creatures on other worlds who are laughing at man. 'Tis alleged that one man, after he became conscious, no longer spoke to other humans, only to animals and plants. Pigeons and lard soldiers look to appearances for signs of travel. Children like the idea of hidden cities and secret writings, because then pushier children can tell them that they've been to such places and seen such things. And onward pushed the lard soldiers, frying in the sun, forever onward to nowhere, but not caring either. What a life, grunted one. What a march, squealed another. Oh, and those beings on other worlds who are laughing at man, they're still at it. Try to type several items. Pick up a piece from last time, if you recall. We were mentioning a locally invented history or description of the kind of search for a grail, a search for some extremely, singularly valuable something or other. And I was describing all the way from putting it in a kind of non-enforceable, non-provable, chronological sequence, as if there could be another kind, but of like a grail going from giving it good old 3 stages, which is always satisfying mentally. Going from a grail that represented a search for the reassurance of the continuation of life. And one great example in the Western world, either that or I made it up, but of being a bloody stick or a dagger of some kind that was driven in the ground at opportune times to represent, to try and call upon the spirits, that was used as this grail to bring about, they hoped, the return of spring, the rejuvenation of their land, the return of crops, and another, at the same level, it was used supposedly to lay next to the bed of a woman who was trying to conceive if she was having problems. It represented man's search, in this case the grail, whatever object it was, but represented a search for the assurance that life would continue. And then the second stage, according to this little version, was that it went into a search for the knowledge of what life was. That you would see then that man collectively or individually had gone past the point that he now believed that the sun, or feared that the sun would disappear sometime every late November, and would never come back. Or never would get back up high enough. It was getting weak or lazy, and it would never get back up high enough, and the weather would never warm up enough for them to have more crops, and they would all starve to death. After who knows how many years, it's like man finally realized that, maybe even somebody counted it, and they went, do you realize every 360 odd days or so, we're right back where we started? And even as dumbwitted as some men are, eventually they got sort of over that, we'll say collectively. Then they got into having a little free time and not worried about the actual return, the actual continuation of life, but they wanted to know have the knowledge of what life was. And then I pointed out that from one version, from one view, they had gone past that into the general area now of religion/faith, and it's just sort of a passive acceptance of the fact that we're alive. And if there's any grail left, it would be in the matter, the way I was putting it to you, of just of faith. The church represents it as primarily now. Parallel to that, let me point out 3 sacrifices that men always feel like that they're going to gain something. It's just the natural workings of the mind, that if they're going to gain something, they're going to find this, they're going, after this, seeking a discovery of whatever picture a particular person has of a grail, of a splendid, unique treasure, the one thing that would be worthy of a more intelligent, more spiritual, more developed man's life's effort, then it naturally fits that he's going to have to pay some price. And I'm just going to clean them all up real quick and give you another sort of parallel history connected to what I just said for another reason, but pointed out that man went from the original sacrifice that they always believed, and of course it's historically been sacrificing it to the gods, but to parallel the first stage, it could be that men were sacrificing to nature themselves. And the first stage, going from, I guess, bad to even badder, but would have been men sacrificing humans. And that is historical, which is not the point, but that is historically the oldest records, that if you're really going to appease the gods, if you were really going to ask nature or life, if you're really seeking the return of life or the fertility of the women so that the race, so that the tribe could continue, then what is the greatest sacrifice? Because everyone knows the mind operates on the basis. It's just natural that you do not get something for nothing. So what is the first sacrifice? What would seem to be the greatest sacrifice they could give the gods is grab a human and throw him in there, throw him on a fire in a volcano, cut him open, but to sacrifice a human. Then, parallel to the second stage, I could say that as men became a bit more civilized, they began to sacrifice animals, or their own wealth, but animals the way it's normally seen, and possessions, shows of their own personal wealth. The third stage, which inadvertently, since I'm making it up, I must point out, inadvertently moved into an area of humor. I know they didn't mean it. And I doubt if anyone's ever described it particularly in this way, but the third stage, paralleling the faith stage in the search for this treasure, then the third stage of the sacrifice, to parallel that, was what amounts to a sacrifice of their will to the gods. Well, just because I said it was inadvertent humor didn't mean that you couldn't see the modicum of humor therein of people believing that, oh well, that we're now even more civilized and we've gone past the point of sacrificing other humans. Oh, that's unthinkable. There's no need to sacrifice your possessions or animals. That's not civilized. I will sacrifice that which is more worthy of a civilized man. I will subject my will. I will sacrifice my will to the system, to the religion, to the dictates of this particular God. Well, maybe it's not humorous. Based upon you people's reaction, I guess I pushed it too far. But at any rate, do you see that, and that is sort of where man stands today, just in general. As always, there are people still back at the first stage. There are people, I wouldn't be at all surprised, somewhere on this planet that still believe, if they're not getting by with practicing, but still believe that the gods want human sacrifices, that the game hadn't changed. They just may be in a position that they're afraid to do it because of more civilized authorities now around them. There are certainly religions that still believe in animal sacrifice, and there's certainly all religions believe in personal sacrifice. You're not going to find any religion that if you say, could I give you part of my money, that they'll go, oh, no. Or, could I give you some of my wealth, or could I give a priest my car, or rabbi, my TV set? And they'll go, oh, certainly, wouldn't hear of it. You know that's not true. And it has nothing to do with any inordinate greed on the part of those in the religious calling. It would now be seen, if they had to describe it, or if I described it that way, that many ordinary people could see what I was pointing to, that now it would be a sign of a more sophisticated person, not being a religious fanatic, not being a follower of some fundamentalist version of any religion, but now, and even if someone wasn't religious, we could do it just on the humanitarian, on the humanistic, philosophical level, that the sacrifice now is your own will. That at the religious level, if we take it that way, would be a man submitting, sacrificing, not his neighbor's wife, not his children, not his goats and sheep, but his will. That is, that he pledges allegiance to the religion. He swears whatever they do, goes through the formality and sprinkles water, cut a little blood or do something, and he swears that I am now sacrificing my will to the system. Oh, they say to the will of God and etc., that my will is now subordinate to the will of God. But what it is that they now swear that I will try to faithfully live by this system rather than by whatever way I wanted to live or used to live. And that would be considered, as I said, in the non-religious sense, in the humanistic sense, it would be that you try and live at least a part of your life for the benefit of others, that you deal in good work, you do charitable deeds, that you consider that part of the rent for being here on earth and being a human is to try and raise your fellow man, is that you have submitted, that you're sacrificing your own personal will, your own personal desires and wants, to some degree, for the benefit of others. All right. Just want to be sure that you guys were loosened and prepared to go on. I had to do it for you. Okay. How about, since I brought up my little story last time of the 100 men, I know last time I said 200, but I know what I'm doing. My little tale about people on a ship. Let me refine and expand it a little bit. Here's the story right quick, without impertinent details. There's a ship, a large ship, and 100 men go out on it for some scientific expedition that I'm not going to try to make up. But for some reason, it's not that hard to picture, they have to go out in the middle of the ocean. They have to get away from land, and they must stay out there a minimum of a full run of the year, 365 days. They must stay away from land. They're doing some sort of experiments. It's not really the point. But they're going to be ocean-locked. They're going to be on the briny deep for a whole year without any touch. They take along a radio, which will pick up the short wave. And they got there, these 100 men, and they're all ordinary men. The cross-section of civilized humanity. Educated, sophisticated, not at all nutcases, just your average person. Some of them even more educated, etc. It turns out, for whatever reason, that once they get away from, they all know the arrangement of the expedition, that they know that they will be out of contact personally with land, with anyone else, that their world is going to amount to that shipboard, and those other 99 people for one whole year, and that's it. They do have a radio, and for some reason, after the first day out and they discuss it, it ends up 50 of them decide to listen to the news every night, the shortwave of the BBC overseas, and they get the news of the world, or whatever, the United States. And 50 of them decide, after they think about it, that they just skip it. If you hadn't thought about it, I threw it in for other reasons, if you recall last time. But imagine the 50 that every night they get through with their work, and things are arranged more or less on a typical workday schedule, that by late evening, the majority of the work that they're involved with is done, and so they're sort of off duty. And 50 of them take their lunch in a cabin where the radio is playing, and they hear the news, a whole hour's worth of news from all over the world and back in their home country. And they sit and discuss it. And by the full news on the BBC, they give the stock market, or I keep saying BBC, just imagine it's a worldwide news broadcast pertinent to the world events and their home country. So let's consider that they also put in the stock market report. Let's do that to make it interesting. The stock market report along with the news of the world and the news from back in their home region. And so 50 of them sit there and they listen to it and have their dinner. And the other 50 are off at the other end of the ship in another area. And for a whole year they hear no news, none whatsoever, and it's not discussed. The two groups of the 50 do not discuss the news, period, amongst each other, the two groups. The 50 who are listening to the radio, you can imagine well the kinds of conversations, the natural conversations after the news is off, and they're sitting there over coffee and cigarettes, and they start discussing, and some start discussing, they're from different parts of the world, and some start discussing the trials that they hear that their particular homeland is now undergoing. They just start discussing the financial affairs of the world, and some start mentioning how they have certain investments and how these investments, according to what they're hearing on the news, are probably experiencing severe body blows, that their fiscal portfolio is probably staggering, reeling. But imagine all this, and then discussing the wars and the rumors of wars, as St. John would say. What's he doing on the BBC? Oh, no. But now you can imagine, now the 50 who are watching the news, I'm just trying to infer, is best under those conditions, them being isolated with no other contact, that they are in a sense as educated and up to date to everything that's going on in the world as anyone is back home. Whereas the other 50, they're still as educated, sophisticated, same IQ, same hipness, same intelligence, same interest in life as the 50 listening to the radio. They're still in the same position, except they go one whole year and not one iota of news from the outside world. And with ordinary people, if you told such a story, I didn't tell them the reason, and if I just began to infer, if I went ahead and said, and do you realize when they got off the ship, there was no difference? But I would prefer, if I was going to use an example of ordinary people, if I hinted what I was about to get at, their mind would immediately resist it. Or I put it to you another way, which I did the other night, I know, but if you told ordinary people right here on land, that the news of the world, what's going on in the world, they could do without, that them keeping up with the news has no real effect on them personally, it is, on its surface, insane, incorrect. And they wouldn't even bother really to discuss it much with you. Maybe make you repeat it, make sure they heard it, and go, you're crazy. It has extreme importance. And you can figure out the examples that they could use, such as the stock market. That's why I picked that, because that would seem to be an easy one, seem to be an obvious one, that if someone is up to date, has some money invested, you must keep up with your investments, or they can turn on you. You can go into fiscal tailspin for not keeping up. Okay. And plus, to knowing that there are countries now rattling in a serious manner atomic swords and sables our way, to think, well, I need to know this. What if, while I'm gone, what if they attack my homeland? What if suddenly the Bulgarians are able to get one of those tanks actually started and actually roll in and attack the great motherland of Romania? And you think, well, I need to know about it. I've got to know about it. I can't be stuck out here in the middle of the ocean for a whole year and them trying to overrun my motherland. I've got to know. And it sounds correct. Sounds unassailable, I know. Except if you're back to this and you can think it all and I ask you the question, rhetorically, that the ship pulls back in from the port from which it departed 365 days later and all 100 men walk off. Do you not see that there is no difference in the men? Their condition is no different from the 50 who heard the news and the 50 who did not hear the news. There will be no difference. It has no effect. That, I'm not going to stay on it because I can keep bringing up an ordinary mind's objection to it and say, well, that can't be true. You either hear it or you don't. And it's not mystical, by the way, in case you think, well, that's above me. No, we're down to stupid level. I mean, at least any of you are beginning now to take that kind of approach, like, well, I don't know, I guess some of this is just, too otherworldly. No, we're back to dock level stupid. Now, if you can't see that there's really no difference, the men have not been affected one way or the other. Think about it. I know it doesn't sound correct. All right, now, are you ready? Could you see the news in this condition as being the ordinary thought processes of the human mind? Come on, think about it. This is not a motion sickness metaphor. Think about those men, 50 men on board ship, they go hear the news every night. All 100 that started out, the news was very important. They were all sophisticated, up-to-date, kind of news junkies. They just considered the ideas, the events out there is of importance. All right, to take it, there's a news item tonight that I sort of set this up that point out that those who believe that the ideas of others is an important part of their intellectual life reveal what a lack of one they have. Now, when I say ideas, and as you should, well, I'll point out that this is not an attack on any form of entertainment or anything. I'm just pointing this out, though, specifically, if you can hear it. There are people who consider going to the movies to be, and I don't mean this in a sarcastic way, but there are people who consider going to the movies to be, or at least some movies, to be an important, an integral part of their intellectual life. Now, I know people do not describe it that way necessarily. In some movies, they would say, well, they're just a throwaway. It was just some garbage movie. It was just one of those silly satires. It was just, or a cartoon. But people who are faithful moviegoers, cinema aficionados, will say, and do say, that certain films are must-sees, and that certain films are not simply a form of in-the-dark entertainment. They are actually an important part to a sophisticated, up-to-date man's intellectual life. To see what's going on, especially foreign films, films that treat subjects of less than mass market appeal, you should seek them out. Now, if that sounds a little too easy, let me go ahead and include reading. Because certainly, the more you get up out of the level of people, there are those of the illiterati of the world who would even look down to some degree on those who would say, well, movie-going can be an important part of one's intellectual life. There are certainly those of a more educated, sophisticated, literary bent that would say, that's not much of an intellectual life. And they would say reading. And we're not talking about trash reading. We're talking about serious reading. If you can begin to see it, again, I know this is indefensible to the ordinary mind, listening to music, which about the only thing I might point out, and I don't mean it's better or worse, but what draws nigh an exception is classical music, that is music without words. an opera or music sung in a foreign language, because if you're hearing something sung in a foreign language, it renders it operationally sans words. This is the human voice just operating, serving as an instrument. But what I was getting at was, at least you have the thing that I was leaving it at actual information in an intellectual sense. The seeking of the ideas of others and listening to a record. Listening to a record sing and singing along, or turning to somebody and nudge them when they're singing about, and if she ever leaves me again, you know, I'll put poison in her carburetor. And you punch somebody and say, huh? That is taking someone else's ideas as being an important part of your intellectual life. It doesn't matters not one whit that a person never says those words. If you listen, or if you gossip, if you just talk. If I keep on, I assume that some of you in a minute's going to go, wait a minute. You said it, you covered it all the first time. The ideas of others, that's right. But it doesn't mean the philosophical important or apparently important ideas. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're reading Plato, Goethe, and it seems like that this is important. And when I say important, that is my intellectual life would not be what it is today. We'll get to that in a minute. But it would be what it is today were it not for me nourishing it. Well, I'm overdoing it now for their sake. Did I not avail myself of outside sources of ideas? If I did not take outside stimulation, be it the dialogues of Plato or the National Enquirer. And of course, ordinary minds immediately laugh at that and say, you're just being silly. There's no comparison. They're the same thing past a certain point. And it's the same thing whether you're listening to Mozart and Glenn Gould humming along and thinking, well, that's almost singing, or you're listening to the Rolling Stones, or you're listening to the Smashing Pumpkins, or the Flaming Assholes, or whoever, and you're listening to some teenager rail against life, or worse than that, some middle-aged guy rail against life, or against teenagers. Once you see the specifics are of no importance, there is no way out. The ordinary mind, of course, will say there is, because that is one way that the ordinary mind stays stable at all, and apparently can hold some position of authority and insight, is it always picks local examples. It always takes something that it can use personally, anecdotally, and say it's not true. That if I say, well, anyone who believes, anyone who operates on the basis that other people's ideas are an integral, important part of their intellectual life, simply reveals their lack of one. And someone hears that, and they go, well, wait a minute. Now, you're talking about like people that just go to trashy movies and watch slasher movies, or people who read cheap romance novels, or that's what you're talking about, right? No. But they can say, well, wait a minute, I agree with part of that, because to believe, for people who say, they'll answer a questionnaire, do you read much? And they go, yes. Well, how much, questionnaire, and you want a free coupon for a half dozen donuts in a grocery store. And they say, well, how much do you read a week? And they put down, they've got boxes like 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. And they go, and you can see them, they're trying to calculate how many pages are in the National Enquirer and how long it takes to read. And they check, 30 minutes. And they look down and they think, well, that's not bad. But then if the person I'm talking about that might be a bit more sophisticated, looking for an exception, an ordinary mind, and I say, well, look here, we got somebody down at the cheapest, lowest end, the economic, social end of your town, and even down there, they check that they read at least 45 minutes a week. And they go, yeah, but they're talking about the National Enquirer. And I go, well, what do you read? And they go, well, I read the Atlantic Monthly and Harper's. You do realize that they will never see. Forget a connection. They'll never see it's the same thing. Would anybody see, at least you think I can't tie them up, would anybody see then that the transcendental sacrifice is not of human life, not of possessions, and not the illusionary sacrifice of illusionary will? It would be the sacrifice of the news. It would be to the point that not only, let's sneak up on it. And again, no offense, this is not an attack, and I'm not encouraging anybody to do one thing or the other. I'm just pointing out something. Let's sneak up all the way from all forms of entertainment. That is, anything that stimulates the mind externally. And I'm afraid you're hard-pressed to find anything that is not in some part intellectual, including spectator sports. Think about it. You would think at first, perhaps, that would be the one form that would not be actually available to categorize as intellectual stimulation. That you go out to watch people run, or you go out to watch people play ball. Do I have to go any further, though? Of course, nowadays, the easy example is that there you sit in a park and you turn around and there are people listening on their phones to an announcer announcing what they're looking at. They're picking up on the radio. Now, that's an easy one. Some of them, there are people who go to the ballpark and take little miniature TV sets with an earphone to hear what the commentator's saying right above their head, what he's announcing, and they paid what it was, large amounts of money, to sit there and look at it and somebody to talk to them about it. What they're looking at. The guy sitting right overhead. That seems easy. Now look around and see a guy with no earphones, no radio, no TV, and him just sitting there. You think he's not doing a running commentary? All right, there's some possibility he's not. Maybe you should punch him because he could be dead. The mind of a sane, breathing human, conscious human in the ordinary sense, is being intellectually stimulated continually. You know that. But people do not make any division between the two, not any operational distinction in response to what I just said. If anyone listened to it and took it seriously, and I said that anyone who considers external stimuli, let's just forget other people's ideas, because that sounded too specific to start with. That's why I did it, to trick you. All external stimuli of a mind, those who consider that there are external forms of stimuli, intellectual stimulation, that are important, necessary, but important to their intellectual life and well-being, just shows they have none. Not in a conscious sense. Of what benefit, of what addition to their vocabulary, using it metaphorically, what will it benefit? How will it expand a cow's vocabulary if he stands in a herd and listens to every other cow in there? Especially those that seem to be his better. He listens to them moo. Do you understand? Now, he may start off with a cheap South Boston accent to his moo, and he may hang around the right kind and pick up that kind of Brahmin in the Boston sense. He may begin to speak like a Martha's Vineyard cow. But no matter what he does, the poor son of a bitch is still mooing. That which you pick up from other cows, that which you pick up from other people's, ordinary. And fat chance you're going to find the non-ordinary. But to still operate on the basis, now I understand it because it seems that way for a long time, that I do benefit. Now I'm not saying that a person cannot benefit, but to consider that it is necessary. I kept trying to resist saying necessary, but I hope you see what I'm getting at. I kept saying important. That there are people who consider reading good material important and watching at least some, 2 or 3 PBS shows on TV per week for every one of cop movies and all that, but that they consider that there are external sources of stimuli, mental stimuli, that are important to a person, to a modern, up-to-date person's intellectual life. All that reveals is you don't yet have one of your own. And there's no way I can't just, me or somebody, I can't just simply point that out. I know, and you suddenly go, oh, I see what you mean, I'll stop it. No, that's not it, and it's not an attack. But I'm just giving you something to consider. And take my story then, my revised story of the guys on the ship. The real sacrifice, had they been an extraordinary group, the 50 who didn't listen to the news, that is the sacrifice they were giving up. That is the acceptance of the news of their mind, of the acceptance of them taking it as being important. Back to the idea that keeping up with world events, if you're a worldly person, if you're just a modern, sophisticated, alert, aware, conscious person, by God, you've got to keep up. You've got to know what's going on. It is, by God, important. Except it's not. Out on a barren plain, men built a city, a marvelous and complex city. In fact, too complex. That was intended, I guess symbolically, because it could be literally true and not. But it's not that men built a city. Hint, hint. Not that they built it too complex. They had to build it that way. But the point is, it is too complex for how they live now. It always is. If any particular city, if we can start writing two symbols down a metaphorical stream simultaneously without getting the horn of the saddle stuck in an uncomfortable place in your psyche, I could point out that back to the literal level, as impacted by the non-literal, by the non-physical, when some area, some group of people, some civilization, but when some group, city, when they begin to live as complex as the city they built, that's when it crumbles and disappears. The city always has to be more complex than they are. Put to you another way, they must still be attributing to the mind an exaggerated importance. Or put it to you another way, they must learn a lesson from those creatures on one planet who were in control. You remember them. But to stay in control, they had to pretend to be in more control than they were. Because if you don't, you're a dead man. Ordinary people have no choice. Ordinary groups of people have no choice. So the group of 50 men on my ship that were isolated and did not listen to the news, if they had been extraordinary enough and had some understanding of how that could be used, in other words, if they did it for a conscious reason, they would be making the sacrifice. And the real sacrifice, again, just because I pointed out a man can't suddenly begin to do it, you can struggle with it. You can at least try to see what it is pointing to realize that what your mind normally does has the same validity, has the same importance to you personally. What just normally runs through your mind, and I'm not going to bother to have a show of hands or say, well, does anybody object to that? And let people go, well, I agree with it mostly, but you don't know some of the important thoughts I have. I'm sorry, folks. It's beyond the bullshit time. That which goes through a man's mind to get past the point of taking it of being of importance, because you can go off for 365 days and not think, and then step back on land, and you're no worse off than you started. And of course, all the mind can do is, well, that's interesting, but Jesus, I don't know. I know you don't. And it says, well, give me a break. You see? You don't see? I could say, would you cut off the radio? And you go, where's the knob? I don't see the point. I know. To an ordinary person, again, understand, we're all agreeing that we all understand it. It's all quite evident that to ordinary minds, the news of the world, that is, the events taking place external to a person, the conditions of life, are of extreme importance, and it would take someone less than civilized, someone less than socially mature, someone less than just of average intelligence to deny that. It literally would. And they would probably want to add, quote, especially today. And then they could start pulling out all the global village and super information highways and all that. That it is just, and the shrinking size of the planet, and a one world economy, a one world village, we're all in each other's pocket, we're all in each other's face, we're all in each other's business. It is now so interdependent that a man simply must keep up. That it would be a sign of a man being less than socially mature, fiscally responsible, intellectually adult, intellectually sophisticated, for a man not to keep up. And it's always been thus, that if we know the facts still fit that if you want to find in the so-called socioeconomic strata. We all know exactly, we're going to say, who keeps up with the news the least? You go down at the bottom. Everybody knows that. The less civilized areas of the world are those where the news is of least importance. It's where the news is least of a profession. And it's just obvious. If a country, some little country, some group of people, let's say a little country somewhere, is striving just to stay alive and feed the people, a newspaper is one of the least things on their mind. Keeping up with world events when you're trying to feed your family from day to day, oh, big deal. It's of no importance. We all know that. But then you can get into an area wherein it is not a matter of actual day-to-day subsistence at the physical level, such as, let's say, here in America. And you can find people here at the lower socioeconomic, as they call it, I'm just using their term, level, we all know, they're the ones who are least interested in the news, who are least informed, and it's not because they're having to get out and work every day. Because all you got to do is collect welfare checks. There's some way to live off everybody else nowadays. So they're not starving here. That's not the point. I want you to understand that even when the circumstances out there seem to have changed, there's some groups of people, it's according to how they're wired up, who have less interest in the news. But now understand, this is not yet pointing at either way that's good or bad, but we all know that you can go down to a trailer park in Arkansas, Southern California, upstate New York, and go in there and interview 500 people. And it's very likely that you won't find over a handful that even know who the president is. You'll be lucky maybe to find one who can come up with something resembling the name of one of their state senators. That's it. And if you were an ordinary, sophisticated type person, and you heard that information, or you went out with a pollster, and you stood there all day and realized, here it is, people driving cars, paying taxes, or else collecting part of your taxes through welfare checks and grants. What it is, they're ordinary people. They're not your kind of people. You live in an upper class or upper middle class neighborhood, but here they are, walking around humans. They got children, they got TV sets, they got clothes on, they can speak literate enough that you know what they're saying, and you find out they don't even know who the president is. The president, for God's sake. You don't even know what's going on. They never heard of the Gulf War. Well, didn't so-and-so's kid brother, he went off somewhere, one of them damn foreign places, 4 or 5 years, was that it? And you're just like, how can you live like that? How about this? Turn around and look. They live like that. And yet, the upper class, the ordinary person, I say upper class, the ordinary, more sophisticated person, looks at that, and their feeling is, if you don't really push them to face up to it, their feeling is, this can't be happening. People simply cannot live like that. Now, I don't mean the physical living in a trailer. They say people cannot live like that. I can't believe, until I went out here, I had no idea. I used to hear little figures on the news, but I did not actually believe that there were people, grown people, walking around, married with families, jobs, that did not know, or who does not know who the president is. And you see their little brains. They're just aghast. As only the upper middle class educated can be. If you live in a trailer park with a 5th grade education, by the way, you can't be aghast. You can be something else, but not aghast. But you do understand what I'm pointing at, that from a quite ordinary view, and we're not laughing or taking up sides, from an ordinary, educated, sophisticated view, a nice person from a middle class neighborhood goes there with a poster. And if you told them beforehand, they said, you're going to see today, you're going to see us interview 400 or 500 people, and you wait and see. I can predict this, says the pollster, to this middle-class, educated person. I can predict you now. We'll be lucky to find 3 people. Let's say we interview 400, more or less. We'll be lucky to find 3 people that can say absolutely certain, when as soon as we ask who the president is, they'll know it. And the person will go, no, don't tell me that. No, that can't be. That can't. And they literally, you can feel it. All of you have got that kind of mentality. Most of you are from that kind of background, or you're wired up that way. Your feeling is, it cannot be. You just simply, it can't be. And if the pollster said, nay, it can be, and you're about to see it. And so you're just sort of stopped for a minute to here's another sane person telling you that, yes, it's true. You're going to see it shortly. And so you're faced with another sane person, equally as sophisticated as you, telling you something that you can't believe, that you said, no, it can't be true. And he said, oh, yes, it's true. You'll see. Your next thing is, all right, it may be literally true, what he's predicting, but your thing is it cannot be operationally valid. I mean, it can't be. People cannot be living here in the 20th century in a mechanized, sophisticated environment and not know who the president is because you're feeling, you don't have to put it. You'd almost begin to sputter. And if the poster says, I'm telling you it's true. It's true, right in there. We're about to go. And your feeling is, I mean, you don't have to put it. It's just your feeling rhetorically. You know what I'm saying? Is that can't be true. Oh yeah, it's true. That's the news. And the more sophisticated, the further are you, relatively and metaphorically speaking, the further up you are in the front of the parade of the mass of humanity, the more you feel like that the news, as we call it now, but I can just call it information, external stimuli, the more, there's no doubt, it's not in question, nobody debates it, it's part of being up there, it's part of being wired to where more of your energy is coming up from the yellow circuits than the blue or the red, that you're coming more from a Harvard motivation than a double wide, than a trailer park. Your thing is that it's the external conditions. That's and it's not your theory. And when I say your feeling, it's not just some imaginary sensation you have. It is your operational, it's your mode of operation. That it's true. External stimuli, you can't imagine it. If we said these people never watch the news, they got TV sets, they play all the time, but you'll never see. Walk around here at 6 o'clock, whenever the local news, you will never see. If the news is on, nobody's watching it. That's the only way the news will be on any TV set in this trailer park, is that no one's watching it. And you think it can't be. And the posters, the intellectual, the average person, he can't imagine living without the news, without having some external input, some stimuli. And yet there they are. And yet my 50 men could come off that ship with one whole year of not knowing one piece of what went on out in the world. And they'd step off that gangplank, and the 50 who listen to the news are in no better position. Their conditions are not altered from what they were when they started. The supreme sacrifice right now seems to be will, as I was saying at the ordinary level, which is imaginary. That's why, since people can't be free, that's the inadvertent humor that I was trying to hint, is men submit themselves. They want a system. That was the first item tonight, if you weren't listening, almost as soon. Just as men leave the childhood garden, the straightforward, quiet, that garden, the first thing they want is a system to live by. Which is no way of saying they immediately go, where can I be outfitted for a straitjacket? I'm exaggerating, of course, but that's what they're saying. That is the compensation for freedom, which there is no chance of them exercising it. But rather than even have to deal with the matter that I don't know what to do with this thing up here, I know what I'll do. I'll become a Jew or a Christian, or I'll be a by God, a patriotic Italian. I'll take up some system. The supreme sacrifice, the willful, the only real sacrifice is for a man to sacrifice taking the news of his head as being important, to accept it as being him, taking it to be important messages that he's picking up from life, to realize I could cut this son of a bitch off for a year and it wouldn't make a bit of difference. I could be living in a trailer park and never turn the news on, never even look at the newspaper, and it wouldn't matter one bit of difference to my internal state of consciousness. The ordinary mind can't deal with that, because if it could actually hear that, you're left in a position of going, which you can't, but an ordinary man would be left in a position like, well, goddamn, thanks a lot. Now what? Which is why it doesn't happen accidentally. If it does, it's not considered a boon to a person. It's considered a bout of insanity, because it can only come about, if it does, through a man's own effort. Or as a news item said, what sane person would want to step off a train out in the middle of nowhere? Hey, I just ask them. I don't answer them. Thank God. God, that didn't get on, did it?